So when we stopped, I think we were studying rotational motion at that point of time, and we had dealt with a few concepts of rotational motion, which is basically when objects are rotating. That was a dud marker. When objects are rotating, um, you can consider a sort of circular disk which is rotating about an axis of rotation. So this is what we call an axis of rotation, which is usually symmetrical. Um, then we took 2 points on this, and this is just a kind of recall of what we have done so far. If you take 2 points on this, then you can say that these 2 points uh, will also go about a circular axis. So if you kind of turn this image, so you can see the top view of this with that plus marking the axis around which it rotates. Um, then we can say that object A, object B will have two kinds of motion. We describe their motion in this context, in rotational motion, in two ways. One is that it has, of course, a linear velocity, uh, the velocity that we have studied so far, that is how much distance in how much time. And obviously, since B will cover a far greater distance when this object undergoes a 360-degree rotation, let's say, right? And therefore, since the time required for both these rotations are the same, but the distance moved by B is far greater, therefore we can say that the linear velocity of B is greater than the linear velocity of A. Now, since we are looking at an infinitesimally small period of time for which its velocity is being spoken of, we can also talk in terms of the direction of this velocity, which will be tangential. So all this we have already discovered. So the velocity of B will be in that direction at that point of time, and for A it will be in this direction at this point of time. So, and we can say that, sorry, this should be A. Velocity of B is greater than the velocity of A. This we had discussed. But then we also said that for rotational motion, there is also another kind of velocity that we have to discuss, which is its rotational velocity, also known as tangential, I beg your pardon, your angular velocity, sorry. Right, and we define the angular velocity in the simplest terms possible by saying angle turned per unit time. So we can say it in terms of angle turned or subscribed per unit time. And then we realize that both objects A and B will obviously have the same angular velocity, because uh, let's say that it did a 360-degree turn in 5 seconds, right? So therefore we can say that both objects turn through a distance of 72 degrees per second. And since point A and point B are both part of the same disk that is rotating, they will have the same angular velocity. So there are two ways in which we can describe the motion of an object undergoing rotational motion. One will be its linear velocity, which we can now call tangential velocity. And the second point is its angular velocity. Okay. So these are the two ways in which we describe the motion. So that was the first part of the session. Um, After this, we also looked at the forces that cause the object to stay in rotational motion. So that started off with this concept that okay, that started off with the concept that if object B and object A have got velocities at any given instant of time, and that velocity is tangential to the path that it is going around in this case a circle, then what about the velocity of the object in a short interval of time afterwards? So let's take B and say that B is in a new position now, B dashed. So it's easy to see now that obviously even if the magnitude of this velocity does not change, okay, so let's say that the magnitude of the velocity remains unchanged, the direction of that velocity will obviously have to change, right? So this velocity I'm trying to keep the same magnitude as possible, but the direction of the velocity has now changed. Now, going back to what we had studied in the first chapter, Newton's first law, we can see that if the velocity of an object changes, then there has to be a force, an external unbalanced force that acts on it. Now, the question is, where does the external unbalanced force come in? So, when we think about that, in this case, like in a disk that is rotating, it's not completely clear where that force is coming from. But if you take the situation of, let's say, and this was the example that we had also used before, to take the example of somebody who is tied a stone to the end of a string and is spinning it around, right, in a circular path, then over there it's easy to see that the stone which will have tangential velocities at different paths, right, uh, when it is there it will have a tangential velocity like that. When the stone has shifted to a new position as it's spinning around, the tangential velocity obviously will now be in this direction, assuming that it's going around like this in an anti-clockwise direction to the plane of the whiteboard. So therefore we can then say that the velocity has changed. Maybe the magnitude remains the same, but the direction has changed. And if the direction changes, we will have to say that the velocity has changed. And if velocity changes, that means the object's motion is accelerated. It's not accelerated in the sense that we normally understand, that there is an increase or decrease in the magnitude, but in this case there's a change in the direction. Okay, so therefore we must conclude that since there is an acceleration, by second law, force is equal to mass times acceleration. If acceleration is there on an object of mass m, then there has to be a force that causes that acceleration. So we also recognize now that that force must be coming from the string, the tension in the string. Right? There is a tension in the string because of the person holding on to the string and pulling it inwards. And that tension is what causes the direction of the object's motion to change, obviously. Why it's obvious is because, let's say if you cut the string at any point of time, and this is of course theoretically cutting the string, we can't actually cut the string without changing the direction in which it's moving at that point of time, that is without interfering. But let us say that we are able to cut the string, let's say, right, somebody said that looks like a bunny in the class, I remember that, but let's say it's a pair of scissors that can cut the string without interfering with the path of the string. Then since the since the tension in the string will now no longer be applicable. So if you cut the string, you break the tension in the string. If you break the tension in the string, then the person is no longer able to apply a force on the stone. So if that happens, then obviously, or maybe not so obviously, the object is going to fly off. But what direction will it fly off in? So let me check now if everybody is following what is going on, or at least a few of you are following what is going on. So I'm asking the question in this context. So this is all basically a recap of what we have already done. I just want to quickly get to the point from where we should start off. So a person is spinning around a string with a stone tied to the end. The stone has tangential velocities to the perfectly circular path that it is going around. And since we can argue that at different points the stone has differing velocities simply because the direction changes, then there has to be an acceleration, because if there is a change in velocity, there is acceleration. Uh, if there is an acceleration, then there has to be a force by second law. So if you cut the string, how do we know that? If you cut the string. So the question is now, if I cut the string with the green bunny scissors there, then in which direction will the stone go? So Meher is replying, it will go straight. Advay is saying it will go straight in the direction where the arrow is pointing, right? So the first law again becomes applicable. If you cut the string, there is no force acting on it. If there are no unbalanced external forces acting on an object, then the object will go tangentially. I also request that when we reply or write something on the chat, please reply to everybody. Okay, let's not be shy. Nobody is going to poke fun at anybody, I hope. Or if it is done, then it is done in the right spirit. So please answer to the whole group, okay, unless you want to ask something specifically or directly to me. In most cases, whatever question that you ask in the group chat, I will directly address it. I will sort of say that so and so asked this question and I am answering that question. So please don't feel shy. Let's not carry all the difficulties from our physical classroom into the virtual classroom. Okay, let's see if we can participate in a different manner over here. But please do participate. Please ask your questions. Please do contribute. If necessary, even by voice. Okay. If I'm not looking at the chat and there is something urgent that somebody wants to ask or something like that, do please switch on your mic and ask. All you need to do is when you switch on your mic, just identify yourself and then ask the question. Okay, thank you. So there are sufficient responses. Everybody is saying that, yeah, it's going to shoot off in a tangential path in this direction because first law becomes applicable, no external forces. The object will move in a straight line path to whatever velocity, in whatever velocity it happens to have at that point of time. Of course, in this case, it will fall down because presumably there is gravity and so on. But in an idealized scenario where there are no other forces that are there, it will continue in a straight line path. Great. So then we come to see the fact that in all such cases, so this is for this string and stone scenario where it is easy to see. But can we say that that is true for a spinning disk as well? Well, it must be because of the material integrity of whatever it is that we are using. It's a plastic disk or a metal disk. The metallic bonds of of the metal or the polymer bonds of the plastic, they are the ones that are responsible for transferring whatever force that is causing this object to spin around to be transferred to that point B, to one infinitesimally small point at that point B, mass at that point B. And that is the reason why that mass at point B, whatever that may be, right, will not move off tangentially. And obviously it is changing directions, so therefore there is a force that is being applied on it. And in general, the force that is applied in this direction, which keeps any object in a rotational path, is given the general name. What is the general name? I forget. I thought we had already mentioned this once. What acceleration? It's called centripetal acceleration. Okay. It's usually given the symbol A with a C at the bottom, and you draw an arrow on top of it to show that it's a vector. But I'll just write that again over here. centripetal acceleration. Okay, and the force that causes this centripetal acceleration, in this case it is the tension, in this case it could be the polymer bonds or the metallic bonds. When you are running on a circular track in a park or in a field or a running track, then the centripetal force will be, so I'm asking a question again just to check if everybody is awake and listening or busy texting or looking at something else. So I'm saying that there has to be a force that causes the centripetal acceleration, okay? And that force in general is called as centripetal force. So as usual, my board has become messy, so I have to erase something. All right. Force that creates this centripetal acceleration is called centripetal force. Right, and the centripetal force in the case of this example was the tension in the string. The centripetal case in this example, if it's a plastic disc that is rotating, then you can say it's polymer bonds. If it is a metal disc that is spinning around, then we can say it's metallic bonds. If you're running around a track, a circular track, okay, in a park, let's say, you're going around a circular, more or less a circular path. So you're undergoing rotational motion. So the question is, where is the centripetal force coming from for that? We are talking about set saying your own mass. So I'm saying, but set we are talking about force. The force has to come from somewhere. So I'll repeat. There's a circular track, and let's say that this is the circular track now, multi-purpose, right? And you're running around this circular track. Oops, that looks funny. Okay. Right? As you are going around, you start thinking about, oh well, this is a circular motion, so I'm going around in a circular path. So there must be centripetal acceleration because I'm continuously changing the direction in which I am moving. So if there is an acceleration, then there has to be a force that causes the acceleration, the unbalanced force that causes the acceleration. So in this case, we said it's the tension in the string. In this case, we said metallic bonds or polymer bonds. What about if you're running around the track? Where does the force come from? Janu is saying the middle of the track. Yeah, the force is directed towards the middle of the track. That's absolutely right. So in this case also you can see the tension will be directed towards the middle. In this case also it seems that when the disk is rotating, the point A and B, the force will be directed towards the axis of rotation, where the axis of rotation meets the object. But where is the force coming from? Yeah, Neeraj is getting closer to the, yeah, Neeraj and Mehra getting closer to it. Your legs turning from you, yes, correct. But does it have a name, the centripetal force? Yes, the curve of the track causes it. Center of mass, no, you're going away from it now. It's a force. Okay, what happens if you go to play football and your shoes are completely bald? You have an old pair of shoes where, and it does not have any ribs left. Yeah, you slip. Why do you slip? Friction, of course. Right? You get it? So without friction, you cannot run on a circular track, or for that matter any kind of a curved track. You see, what if you're trying to drive a car and you're trying to take a turn? You shouldn't be driving a car, but what if you're in a car and you're driving around, you try to take a curve? and your tires are bald, you won't get sufficient friction. At some point of time, your car it'll actually go off in a tangential path to the track. Okay, so in that case, it's the frictional forces that are there between the track and your shoes, or the tire and the road, right, which causes you to go on the circular track. And that frictional force then acts as the centripetal force, the center seeking force. If you remember, we kind of broke up this term, right? Centri means center, petal means seeking or directed towards. So center seeking force. So friction provides the centripetal force. So is that clear to everybody? Is that clear to everybody? Shall we move on? Somebody's got their mic on. Unless you want to speak, please don't turn your mic on. It can be a bit distracting. Okay, anyway, I have switched it off now, so you don't have to worry. So any questions, any doubts, anything that you want to ask, you can ask now. Then I'll go over the next thing. So this class mostly we will be just taking up whatever we have done so far. The next thing that I'll discuss will be a kind of a fictitious force that happens to oppose the centripetal force, what is known as the centrifugal force. And then my famous space school. So I'll also talk quickly about that, and then we will most probably we'll stop because we only have that much time. But if there are any questions at this point of time, please ask while I get the whiteboard erased. Seth asks, how exactly does centripetal force, how exactly does friction act as a centripetal force? And my counter question to you would be, then what allows you to run on a circular track without slipping and fall, without moving off in a tangential path? See the arguments. The arguments are that if you are running around in a circular path, let's say that you are running with the same tangential velocity. That means you are not changing your velocity. For some reason, you are running like a robot, and you are doing whatever 4 meters per second. The fact that you're going around in a circular path means that you're changing your direction continuously. For after all, if you did not change your direction, then you would actually go off tangentially to the path. So you're changing direction, which means your velocity is changing, which means that you are in accelerated motion. And then if you're under accelerated motion, then there must be a force by second law, which is causing that to happen. So because without an external unbalanced force acting on it, you cannot accelerate. Now the question is, where does that acceleration come from and where is it directed towards? So that can be different in different cases. In the case of you running around a track, it must come from your contact between the shoe or your feet and the ground. There must be some force that prevents your feet from slipping while it constantly tries to turn it. And if you have any doubt about it, as you're walking around in your house today or go to exercise to your garden or your terrace today, try taking a run and making a turn and see that the direction in which you are, feel it in your body, the direction in which you are applying the force in order to make the turn possible. All right. So do that a little bit and then you will start seeing. So the logical connection is in this manner. Okay, first law, second law. That puts you in a situation where you say, no, there has to be a force. Okay. And since the acceleration is directed towards the center, that's the only way in which the object will keep turning towards the point around which it is spinning. Right? So if the acceleration is towards the center, then the force must also be pointed towards the center. Those are my arguments. I hope that's clear enough. If it's not, do please mention it. So is that now clear, Seth and Meher? Meher kind of joined in with Seth. She's like, yeah, exactly how. Okay. So kind of running out of time. I'd just like to tell right now that we have 40-minute sessions that are part of the free Zoom thing. So we get 40 minutes of meeting time. At the end of 40 minutes, you automatically get logged out. So what I normally do is I try to keep it within 40 minutes, but if it doesn't work out, sometimes you want to do a little bit more, maybe another 5-10 minutes. Uh, then what I do is I immediately stop the meeting and restart it, and everybody just needs to join back in. Okay, so that usually does not take much time. We get it done within a couple of minutes. So in case we run out of time, if I haven't completed whatever it is that I'm saying, I will come back online, just rejoin the meeting. We will run it for another 5-10 minutes, and then we can stop. Okay, so okay, Seton Meher says they are fine with this now, so we can move on. So then we came to the idea of centrifugal force. So my arguments kind of went on like this. Um, I don't remember who it was that I made to hang from a ceiling. So it must have been different people in different sections. But you kind of like ask somebody to hang like that, right? And I ask them, in which direction do you feel a push or a pull? Do you feel some kind of a force? Right? I say, yeah, I feel a force. Let's say we hung up who? Is Advay here? We'll take Advay as an example. We hung up Advay like that. With his hands, not his neck. Okay? And Advay says, yeah, I feel a force. There's a force acting in that direction. Okay? It's a tension in the rope. And say, Advay, do you feel gravity? I said, yeah, of course I feel gravity. I said, which direction is gravity acting? It's acting in this direction. Okay. I say, very good. Okay. So now I'm going to get a little rough. So just hold on. So you start spinning Advay. Okay. Advay is wondering, what did you do to me to be put through such torture? Okay. And there is an axis like this, and Advay is being spun around like that. Okay. So now I am asking Advay, do you feel a push or a pull? Advay is in great pain because he is holding on with all his strength. He's quite a strong fellow, but still it requires some effort. Yeah, I do. In which direction? He says, towards the ceiling, along the rope. I said, okay, good. You feel tension there. And I said, do you feel gravity? He says, yeah, of course I feel gravity. That's the big problem. If gravity weren't there, it wouldn't be so much of an issue. So I asked him, in which direction do you feel gravity? He said, opposite to tension, of course. Okay, so he feels gravity in that direction. But then I say that there is a problem there, because we all know that gravity can't act in any direction other than towards the center of the earth, right? It has to be at right angles to the surface wherever you are. So this direction has to be right angles, okay, pointing towards the center of the earth. So how come Advay is feeling a gravitational pull in this direction? Well, he feels it like that because he feels that if he lets go of the rope, he's going to fly off in that direction, right? But we know that that's not the case, because if he does leave the rope at that point of time, he's going to fly off in the direction outward, towards the camera, right, out of the bowl, and then he will fall to the ground. But that's his problem. But he's not going to fly off in this direction, contrary to what he feels. He'll come out like this and he'll fall down like this, right? So he'll come out of the board and he'll fall downwards towards the ground. So what is this force that is there? Well, that force is a force that we cannot call gravity. It's a fictitious force. It doesn't exist because it does not cause acceleration to happen in its direction, right? The acceleration is not going to happen in his direction. There's going to be a deacceleration, which is going to make him fall downwards, and then some deacceleration in this axis coming towards the camera because of wind resistance and so on. So this force that he really experiences is a fictitious force, right? And we call that fictitious force as centrifugal force, moving away from the center, in other words. Okay, and this centrifugal force is very real. This centrifugal force um, can help you defy gravity. How? We took another example of somebody, let's say Janu in this point, right, who can hold on to a bucket in which there is some water, right, and you can spin it around. Let's say it's easier to spin it like that. Okay, and if you do it fast enough, you can actually fool the water into thinking that the gravity is in the other direction. But what is actually happening is that you are using the centrifugal force to make the water stick to the bottom. Okay, there are some kind of dances I have seen, traditional dances in which ladies hold diyas in their hands, lit diyas with the oil and all that, and they dance. And in which case you can actually turn your hand upside down. So you hold the diya like that, and in part of the dance you turn your hand upside down. You do it quickly enough, nothing happens. The diya doesn't fall down, the fire doesn't go out, and so on. So basically, you are using the centrifugal force, and you use the centrifugal force to defy gravity when there is an actual gravitational force. Okay. This can also be used, as I suggested earlier, to set up space colonies. So this is an old dream of humanity. It's still in the range of mostly science fiction, but the mathematics and the science behind it is pretty solid. These donut shaped colonies that we can set up in space, maybe with all this COVID pandemic and so on, God knows there have been so many such cases over the last 15 years. SARS, swine flu, bird flu, now the COVID-19, then there was the Nipah virus scare in Kerala sometime back. These things keep happening, and it seems like this is going to be part of our altered reality in the biological space. So maybe what will happen is we'll start setting up space colonies where we can be very far away from these kinds of problems. But I was talking in terms of having a school out there in space. And what kind of a school would that be? I have spoken to both classes about this. I'll just quickly go over it for the benefit of anybody who might just want to recall for the fun of it. So if we have a space colony, sort of donut shaped thing, right, a toroid with a very large cross section. So I'm talking something in terms of like hundreds of meters between these 2 points. Let's say 100 meters. Okay, the diameter of this is about 100 meters. So you can then work out that this is going to be a fairly large cross section of it. And I can set up the classes of my imaginary school within these spaces, right? Because this will be kind of like it's going to be a cylindrical structure. But what I can do is I can do some filling up over here in the sides and so on, and actually make it into a kind of a cylindrical cross section, but it will be cuboid in the middle. And we can have people in these classes. I said, but don't you think you're going to have very limited classroom space? No, I can have classrooms everywhere, all around this. So I can have classrooms over here. They say, okay, then what about the classrooms on this side? Won't they be upside down? Yeah, they will be. They're going to be like that. But what I'm going to be doing is there's going to be an axis of rotation through here, and the whole thing is going to be spun around. Oh, they'll get so dizzy if you spin them around like that. No, but I'm talking about something that is so huge. I'm going to be spinning it around in such a rate that there is going to be a centripetal acceleration, right, which they will experience in this direction, and because of which they will experience a centrifugal force in the opposite direction, which I can tweak to such a rate, I can work out the maths and tweak to such a rate that they will experience exactly 9.8 meters per second square, simulating the gravitational field of the Earth. Okay, so then there should be absolutely no problem. Okay, Ariki has a question. She's saying, will the centrifugal force and the gravity be the same in the first case where man is hanging straight? Mm, yeah, they will be equal. Yes, because he's got sigma f is equal to 0, right? So there is he's in equilibrium. He's in static equilibrium. So if he's in static equilibrium, then whatever forces are there, they are equal and opposite. Okay. Yeah, and please don't feel shy. Ask questions to the entire group. It shouldn't be a problem. Parikshit saying momentum. Parikshit, anything to point out? Okay. If there is anything, just write to it. And, and if this whole thing is spun around at exactly the right rate, then I'm going to be able to simulate gravity-like effect on this space colony. And of course, we had also spoken in terms of having some spaces in between over here where people could then, you could come to this zero gravity region right in the middle. Because as you come closer and closer towards the center, your tangential velocity will reduce. And as your tangential velocity reduces, the effect of gravity will also reduce. So when you come to right about the center, you will be feeling either near zero gravity or zero gravity. And I suggested that that's where our sleeping spaces should be. Okay, we should be eating, playing, studying in the spaces around, but we could be sleeping in the spaces at the center. How do we get from here to there? So we said that we can have elevators, escalators, or if it's an old-fashioned Krishnamurti Foundation school, then we'll have ladders with some rings around it so that people don't fall through. And then you can climb up and climb down. Only thing is you got to be careful, especially when you're climbing downwards towards the classes, that is, so that you, because there is an effect of increasing centrifugal force, and as you come closer and closer, you're going to start feeling heavier and heavier, so you should be careful as you descend the stairs. So this is, I think, the point at which we stopped our classes, and we'll have to kind of take it further from here. The particular concept that I want to develop from here is the concept of rotational inertia. And um, that we will do in what is it, tomorrow's class, right? We have a class tomorrow. The next day that we meet is tomorrow. So we will take it up at that point of time. So is there any questions? Anybody wants to ask something at this point of time? So today's class was just a kind of um, a review class, just to kind of make sure that we are on the same page with regard to whatever it is that we are going to do over the next 3 or 4 weeks. And this stuff that we have done today, we have already covered in the classroom, but I just thought that we lay it out as a first thing. And then in tomorrow's class, we will take up the concept of rotational inertia. Incidentally, after almost everybody had left, there were about 6 or 7 people still left on campus who were leaving a little later. So I asked them if they wanted to complete rotational motion in one session, and a few brave hearts volunteered to do that. So I had some 4 or 5 of them in class in the bio lab, and we had a torrid 1 hour session in which I went through all the concepts in rotational motion. I don't think anybody understood anything. Yeah, set says blitzkrieg. so, this is just going to be a kind of an unpacking of the blitzkrieg. So Meher is asking, why will there be no gravity at the center? There will be no gravity at the center. Could somebody else argue it out for Meher? And Bhavya is asking, can you explain the Janu example? Oh, the bucket one. Well, you should try this out. Uh, and you can do it in the dance form, Bhavya. So you just keep some object in your hand and you try to kind of spin it around while dancing in such a way that you don't drop the object while holding your palm upside down. So keep a small object in your palm, and you can try this even now. If you just take a pen lid or something like that, keep it in your hand and move your hand fast enough downward and then upward again, you will find that the object does not fall out. Initially, you will cup your hand a little bit, but you can continue to open your hand, but nothing will happen. The object does not fall. Seth's asking, isn't it also a consequence of first law? Which one is a consequence of first law? Rotational inertia. Yeah. Yeah, but it is a consequence of rotational inertia. It's very similar in nature, but there is a curious kind of an um, uh, counterintuitive thing that happens. We'll come to it tomorrow. We'll meet our Aristotles again tomorrow, so to say. The closer you get to the axis, says Nandan, the force will diminish. Why should that be, Nandan? Why will the force have to diminish? Seth says because there will be no centripetal force. That is right at the center. But why should it diminish? That is the question. Anyway, maybe I'll leave that as an open question because it's almost time for the next class to begin. But I leave that as an open question to anybody who can prove to me what exactly is it that causes the um, gravity to go down as you go closer and closer to the center. Okay, so we'll stop now. Beam sir is here for his class 9 maths class. We'll pick this up again tomorrow. See you guys at the same time tomorrow. All right, bye.